Well, welcome to Health Issues. I'm your host, Chris Sylvain, and we're thoroughly excited about today's show, and definitely Happy New Year to everybody. And as we pass these holiday seasons, so much has been going on in the news. Unbelievable. But we're dealing with a subject that, and we're here to talk about today, is race in biology. And hey, it's definitely there. Let's just go right to it. We have Dr. Matt Creighton. He's been with us before, and we're excited to have him. He's assistant professor of biology at Xavier University. Excited to have you. Thanks, Dr. Creighton.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, you know, we back on again, just a wealth of information and knowledge, and race has been in the news today, obviously, when we're speaking about the European Heritage Association. But let's talk about race. Is it a biological construct at all? Is it biological?
Yes, as we are looking more into the area of genomics, and so and there are many DNA kits out now today that you can buy over the shelf, and you send those off and you can find out what part Asian you are, what part African, what part European. So there are some members of a gene, which we call alleles. So there are some alleles that are more prevalent among the Asians or among Africans and so forth. And okay. Based upon the percentage of your alleles, those tests are able to say this is your ancestry. Okay. So prior to that, we strayed away from, or really stayed away from, using genetics to identify race because of the eugenics movement that occurred 50, 60 years ago that tried to, that was more divisive of individuals and tried to place a hierarchy on intelligence and skills of different human beings. And so, but as we move forward, we're taking precautions and a new direction as we move and look into personalized medicine and looking at the ethnicity and ethnic background of the individual to better diagnose and treat patients as they move forward based upon their genetics. And again, that's going to then relate to the social side by looking at what are the genes that are related to race and how do we define race.
So the groups, and we'll call it what it is, it's obviously saying that based upon the European heritage, that it bestows upon them certain, not necessarily just skin color as if paint features, but actually attributes. So there is a sliver of truth, but it's stretched out. When we start to talk about attributes and what's better or worse than something else, that becomes an opinion of the individual who has that attribute. Okay. And so we do have slight differences, and we get into genetics and we talk about there's one base pair difference, or what we call a polymorphism within the gene. So all individuals will have the same gene, and you could have one or two base pairs that's different within that gene, within the DNA that makes up that gene. And so that may necessitate a different treatment, drug treatment, but as far as how is it playing out, it may give us a different skill as well. Particularly as we talked about previously with muscle fibers, and so what type of muscle fibers you have, whether you have fast twitch or slow twitch, and the fast twitch most prominent in sprinters and allows for fast running. The slow is for endurance, and so depending on what you think is favorable to be able to run a marathon or to be able to run a 100-yard dash, you know, then you decide what's favorable and what's better than the other. And so again, that would be a matter of opinion, and it would be context-based. Right, and you couldn't take it out of context. And so, but the whole concept that it's irrelevant, that skin color has no relevance out past the level of skin, when it's more complex than what people make it seem, but there is difference. There are differences.
There are differences, and today those differences are not as important or major as they were years ago, centuries ago, where skin color was necessitated based upon where you lived, the geographical area. And so darker skin gave more protection from the sun, and so those individuals who lived near the equator had darker skin. As those individuals, compared to the individuals who live farther away from the equator in Europe, had lighter skin because they needed to be able to absorb more skin, more sun through their skin.
Okay. Well, this concept of through evolution, where some races evolve later and obviously that has something to do with the differences. I read something a while ago that even light skin is only 7,000 years old, or that type of thing.
Yes, it's believed that modern humans originated in northern Africa.
Okay.
And so in the areas that we would now know as Egypt, Ethiopia, so northern Africa, where those individuals are, in our culture, we would say a light-skinned black person, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So they would be like a cafe au lait color. Okay? So those individuals migrated both north and south. So for those individuals who left and went south more towards the equator into southern Africa, their skin got darker because they were going into an area that had more sunlight. Okay? As those others went north and went into what is Persia or the Middle East as we know it now, their skin lightened as they moved forward, and then those individuals went over to Asia and some went to Europe. And so as people migrated, or humans migrated over years, the skin lightened because they were moving at a farther distance from the sun. And to be able to metabolize their vitamins, you had a lightening of the skin as it moved forward. So it took thousands of years for that migration to occur. So from the time they left northern Africa to arriving in Europe, it had been thousands of years, and therefore you would have the difference in the evolutionary times.
Well, and let's move right where you're speaking about. It's like colder up north.
Yes.
And so items of necessity of being up north, it would affect social structures and the way people dealt with one another.
Exactly. So as the different groups of humans moved around the earth and repopulated, relocated, they had to adjust. So their bodies over time adapted to the colder climates. So you would have more body hair. You would have a narrower nasal passage so that you can take in the cold air, longer hair to keep you warm. And so those adaptations came as compared to someone who was living near the equator. You need less body hair to stay cool. Also, the short hair, curly or kinky hair, would hold the sweat to keep your head moist so that you wouldn't overheat in the sun. And so there were different adaptations that occurred. Also, where you lived necessitated the invention of tools. And so if you lived in an area that was more coastal and you did fishing and you ate fish and seafood as your diet, you would need different tools for fishing as compared to if you lived in more of a wilderness area and you were fighting mountain lions and bears, and so you would have more sophisticated weaponry to protect yourself. And so we see those differences as we look back through anthropology and we look at the tools that were there.
Interesting, and you start thinking about the type of organizations, hunter-gatherers, or because if people, I mean, hey, if you can just run and grab some food and it's kind of plentiful, the land of milk and honey, right. So to speak, it would create a different type of different types of relationships, I would think.
Correct. So you had different relationships in different social groups that you had there, as well as I was saying, different diets. So that would indicate body differences. So those who were on more of a seafood, fish diet wouldn't be as tall as those who were on a meat diet. And so there are just slight differences. And so as these groups of humans were separated for those thousands of years, right. and then coming back together in what was America, right. you would see those right. differences based upon thousands of years of change that had occurred in the different groups.
And hence we have the heterogeneous society of America, probably land of the free, home of the brave, that we have this amalgamation of these different groups, and
exactly.
And so be it.
Exactly. And so it's true that we would be, America would be the melting pot, because after getting to America, coming to America, then you had interracial or interbreeding of those separate groups. Okay. And then we have our present Americans, who we are today, a mixture of different societies and different cultures, different backgrounds.
In under various ways, and that
yes.
I mean, we can go there. I mean, we
can.
From an academic standpoint, I think
yes.
it takes it to a level where it can be discussed, but outside of academia, outside of doing it respectfully and intelligently, what we see is the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes. Yes, yes. As we look at that, we got, moving through slavery and post-slavery, and you see the invent or the establishment of the Ku Klux Klan, and known to be a hate group and based solely upon race and religion, and later years adding on sexual orientation and others. That would be based upon lack of knowledge as well as fear. There were groups of people who believed that the Africans and African slaves who were brought over were a different race, or were not human race. Yeah. Right. And so they believed that they were an animal form that was somewhat lower than humans, and that in their minds justified the brutal treatment that was then executed upon the African slaves. So we do know that we are all one species. We're all Homo sapien, and we just happen to look very different on the outside, but on the inside we're very much the same. Right. And so we're still fighting that ignorance that we would have there.
Another subject.
Yes.
But literally, I guess when we look at it, the 3/5 human that's in the Constitution, that was in the Constitution, 3/5 of a man, we're speaking biology there.
What was said to be biology?
What was said to be, right,
yes,
right.
Yes,
Obviously alive, but they were attempting to make an intelligent statement based upon their understanding of the differences, that our differences as African Americans were less valuable to society.
Correct, and that was simply based upon skin color. But if you go back and think of the simple fact that you had Africans who were brought to America, and within a period of time they learned the language, they learned to speak English from their native language, they adjusted to the culture and learned the ways of that, and so it showed the intelligence that was there. It was against the law to teach people of color, black people, or the slaves to read and write. But as soon as slavery was abolished, it's stated in many history books that blacks went from, in one generation or 100-year span, went from an illiterate people to a literate people. And so with the advent of black schools, the historically black colleges, blacks were educated on a large scale. And so the level of intelligence, there isn't a difference in intelligence. It was in the, I think in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, you had early geneticists who actually reported, and it was the science of the day, that there was a hierarchy in intelligence where Asians were most intelligent, then whites, and then blacks. So those tests were based upon performance scores, a standardized test, which are based upon exposure. So there were questions on those tests that black students or kids had not been exposed to, and therefore they got the questions wrong. Because you got the questions wrong, they then made the inference that they were less intelligent. And so any educator would would tell you today, if you don't teach a kid something and you give them a test, they're not going to pass the test.
Okay.
So that was the basis of the science. Since then, we've refuted that science, and that's no longer the case. There isn't a hierarchy based of intelligence based upon ethnicity.
Okay, well, let's play devil's advocate. Okay, after we adjust for income, we adjust for family structure, nuclear families. After we adjust for all of the variables, yes, we still find on standardized test scores Asians, Caucasians, African Americans. After we adjust for the variables, so from a Hitlerist David Duke standpoint, slam dunk, hey, we're just making stuff up.
Okay. I think we can adjust for some variables, but if you're inside that actual school, you may see that there are variables that did not come into play or consideration in what's affecting or what's hindering the learning process in those schools, or whether there's focus upon the work itself, the material itself, as compared to what's the skill in taking a standardized test. What are the tricks of shade C or something that you're taught, that some schools teach their students about how to take a standardized test well. different things of nutrition, the meal before or the day of, how much sleep that the students get the night before. So there are some variables I don't think are taken into account that then relates to the performance of the students or even the importance of the test. For some students, they just blow it off and take the test.
Okay, so, but to 75-year-old guy who says, he has a granddaughter, and, he's a white guy, he doesn't want his granddaughter to marry a black person because he says that they're less intelligent, and because of there's this group, and they Steve Scalise, I never forget, he got 100% rating from this particular group, and you go to this group's website and they speak about their European heritage and how that bestowed upon them a better political system, a better way of operating. And so without being said, it's saying basically if you look at Africa, Africa's a mess, so therefore hey, this is what's going on in Africa, this is the way the blacks operate. So he doesn't want his granddaughter to participate. Now, they'll make the argument that, well, because of their thin noses and because they came from this climate and they were able to forage for their food, they weren't dependent upon anything, that's what allowed them all the way from Scandinavia or whatever to be stronger and better. And why should they mix with people who don't have those attributes?
Again, we go back to a matter of opinion. So for those individuals, they feel that they have these better skills and that I'm watering down my genetics if I mate with someone of a lesser class. And so there is no scientific evidence or psychological evidence either that based upon race or ethnicity that you have a higher level of intelligence. So again, throughout historical times, the area in which you lived necessitated the tools and the advancement of that particular culture as it went forth. To make then judgments on another culture to say you're less advanced than we are or you're not as smart as we are because we have this, it doesn't speak to the intelligence of that particular group. It doesn't mean that they didn't have the capability of inventing those things. There was not the necessity to build those particular things. And so that's a different story.
Interesting. Now, but at the same time, I find the major thrust of those organizations is that if we intermarry or whatever reason, it would wipe out their race and their heritage. So the big term heritage, because to protect their heritage, they have to control the neighborhoods. We can play basketball, but we definitely don't need to be intermarried.
Okay. Yes, when it comes to the genetics of interracial marriages and matings, and we get to basic genetics of dominant and recessive characteristics, lighter skin colors are recessive to darker skin colors. And so when Caucasian or white people have children with other ethnicities, the skin color of the other ethnicity usually covers the Caucasian, or there's a blending of the two colors. Okay, skin tones. In that respect, yes, you would have a browning of America. However, you would be basing that, or I think the heritage groups are basing that on 100% participation. You would never control or get 100% of white people to have children with black people, or and vice versa. There isn't a way to control matings, and so that's one of the things that we look at in biology, and just basic mate selection, sexual selection of organisms. So humans are the exemption to the rule because we don't have controlled matings. So because there will always be people who will choose to mate within their own ethnicity for whatever their reasons are, that ethnicity will always be present. And so there isn't a way to breed out any one group of individuals.
Well, it reminds me of the police officer who shot Michael Brown. He said Michael Brown was, I forgot the term that they use, almost like this Incredible Hulk. And so the pictures of the African is this huge, domineering, that's gonna, because he's his race, because of his genetic makeup. And
yes, right. But you would see that with any individual. You have Michael Brown, who's a huge, strong African American. I'm not as big and strong.
I'm big.
But we could just go to our New Orleans Saints team, and you can look at plenty of white guys who would have the same strength. So it isn't a basis. You can't divide those characteristics just based solely on race and ethnicity. So yes, it is convenient to choose one particular incident, and then you would, use that as propaganda, as they were doing in that particular case. And that's usually the case when you're promoting something, an agenda, as they are with the white heritage. Now, I don't have a problem if you are celebrating your culture and the accomplishments of your culture, as we do with African American Heritage Month. Okay, but to put down other groups and to spew hatred and to enact violence on another group that's not, of individuals who are not a part of your heritage, I believe is wrong, and it goes against what the Bible says.
You're swinging with working on all cylinders there. So, literally, because biology is broad, and so it's impossible to separate. And I'll throw this in that as Africans, since we're already intermingled for the most part, particularly in America, and I always say, and even in Africa too, for the most part, in many areas, there's so much intermingling. As we intermingle, we're still black.
Correct.
If they intermingle, they're not white anymore.
Correct. And that's self-identification, and that's what we have here in America. How do you self-identify? Do you classify yourself as black? Do you classify yourself as other? Tiger Woods got a lot of flack for that. He was one of the first people that we considered to be black, who said, I'm multiracial. And we all, a lot of America took offense to that. And so, but you have the right to self-identify, and if you want to acknowledge the different areas, if you know your different ethnicities, why not celebrate them? Okay. Now, for a group that's saying that white is supreme, then to have any other ethnicity, then for them would be a negative. But again, that's your opinion, where someone else may think that, hey, this is something to celebrate. I have additional ancestry as compared to what you can just physically see on the outside.
Well, as at a higher level, I mean, there's a low debased level, and there's a higher level. Regardless of the differences, there's none higher or lower. Correct. So we should celebrate and enjoy, and let's just, like Rodney King say, why can't we all get along?
Exactly, exactly. And celebrate our differences for what they are. It's no different, as I often share with students. Different doesn't mean better or worse. If you have an apple and orange, they're different from one another. One's preferable in a particular situation. You wouldn't want to bag up oranges if you were trying to make an apple pie. So it depends on what you need at that particular time. What does that particular ethnicity or what does that skin color offer? And again, when you're at the equator, it provided additional protection from the sun, protection from skin cancer and the like. Whereas in lighter in a colder culture, you would need lighter skin so that you can absorb those rays because there were fewer sun rays. And so depending on where you lived geographically, it made a difference. Today, we're a mobile society. You can go anywhere you want in the world and live anywhere you want. So it really doesn't matter as much. And so we just have to celebrate our differences.
Okay, let's flip on back, and I know that was the last show that we did purely on intellect, though.
Yes.
How do intellect and genes, how do they work?
Okay. That's still a hard one for us. Okay, it's still difficult, and there isn't one gene for intellect. When you start to look at intellect, you have to consider lots of factors, everything from vision, your hearing capacity. Of course, there are the neurons that make up the brain, and the number of neurons that would be there, and the development of those. So during pregnancy, what was mom's diet? Was there use of illicit drugs, those type of things that would have a negative effect on brain formation. So those things will come into play, and then dexterity of the individual, and then exposure. We're learning that early exposure to different languages, to music forms, different music forms, increase brain formation and neuron formation, those neural networks, which then enhances intelligence. So there are things that can be done environmentally, and those would be things that we consider to be environmental, playing the music, speaking different languages to the child, that goes beyond your genetics. And so genetically, there's not much that we know as far as intelligence.
So that idea, it's just parents saying that, hey, that's a smart child because they came from smart parents. Literally, it's more than just what's in the genes in and of itself.
Well, definitely we can see patterns of heredity where there are families that are very bright, and then there are some that are not quite as bright, and that would be capacity, but we don't know what genes control that and how that's inherited. Same as we don't know what causes twins. We know it runs in families, but there isn't a gene that says you're going to have twins. So those are still mysteries that we have in genetics.
Okay, so and always look at genes as almost like a conductor. It's conducting, but they can't control what the symphony plays. They lead,
Correct.
but there are other influence.
Correct.
So genes, in only some areas do genes just dominate.
Yes, there's some times where it's definitely just the gene expressing itself. Other times, like you're saying, if it's the symphony, it may be the sound system. That's affecting the way the audience is actually receiving the sound that's coming from the instruments. And so we look at that, and that sound system would be like the environment. So there's an environment, it's genes plus environment gives us what we call our phenotype, which is your outward appearance, right, or your behavior. And so you do have a genetic predisposition, but that genetic predisposition is also influenced by your environmental factors, be it actual weather conditions, the sun, or exposure to UV or something, or it could be your teaching of your family, your culture, your heritage that you're growing up with. We do this, we don't do that type of thing will affect how you express yourself.
So we have power.
Yes.
We have power.
Yes. And that's a message we try to emphasize with our students in our introductory genetics course. You're not the sum total of your genes. Just because you have a gene for something does not mean that's the be-all and end-all of it. You can train your body, say for instance, if we go back to the muscles. And so you have fast twitch muscles that says you're supposed to be a sprinter or gives you the predisposition to be a sprinter, but you really want to be a marathon runner. Yeah, you can train and develop those muscles so that you can run a marathon. So it wouldn't be a case that you would never be able to run the marathon.
Dr. Matt Creighton, I believe me, I will keep this for years to come. I think you've all been thoroughly blessed by the information that's been shared here today. Hey, let's kick everything to a higher level. Let's love one another. Let's all come together and let's just do the right thing. We appreciate you. Stay strong. Fight as hard as you can. Thank you so much.